Back then, the smartest guy in the room wasn't the one holding the biggest weapon. He was the one holding a paperclip. Yeah. And from 1985 to 1992, MacGyver aired on ABC and quietly changed the action genre in a big way. Starring Richard Dean Anderson as Angus MacGyver, with Dana Elcar as his long-suffering boss, Peter Thornton. The show followed a government problem solver who handled impossible situations using physics, chemistry, and whatever happened to be nearby. Today, we're counting down 15 strange facts about MacGyver. Stick around for number 14 because the show apparently had fans inside the CIA, and they weren't just watching for fun. Before we get into it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hype this video up. It helps YouTube show this to more retro TV fans just like you. Alright, let's solve some mysteries. Number 1. The no-gun rule defined the entire show. Now, from the very first episode, MacGyver was built on a truly bold idea for 80s television. What if the hero never picked up a gun? Creator Lee David Zlotoff and executive producer Henry Winkler wanted a character who solved problems without using weapons. So instead of bullets, he used physics. Instead of ammunition, he used creativity. And Richard Dean Anderson fully supported the idea. But there was one small technical exception. MacGyver does fire an automatic rifle in the pilot during the opening mission.
But almost right after that, the rule was set in place permanently, and the reason was less about philosophy and more about being practical. A gun is a shortcut. The moment Mac got one, the tension would disappear. Every problem would have the same answer. Take the gun away, and suddenly every locked door, every ticking bomb, every armed enemy becomes a puzzle instead of a shootout. The rule became so important to the show's identity that writers reportedly joked that if MacGyver ever carried a gun again, it would be to shoot the writer who suggested it. And to give it emotional weight, the show built a belief into Mac's backstory. In the episode Blood Brothers, we learn that MacGyver was part of a childhood accident where a friend was killed by a handgun. That painful experience gave the show's most unique creative rule a real emotional reason behind it.
Number 2. MacGyver became a real word in the dictionary. You know a character has truly made it when their name stops being just a name and starts becoming a verb. Some characters get action figures, some get lunchboxes. MacGyver? He got the English language. In 2015, Oxford Dictionaries officially added MacGyver as a verb, defined as making or fixing something in an improvised or creative way using whatever items are available. Now, here's where it gets nerdy, but in the best way. There's a difference between Oxford Dictionaries and the full Oxford English Dictionary, which is basically the Hall of Fame for words. The OED didn't publish its entry for MacGyver until 2019, and then in 2022, Merriam-Webster added it too. Very few fictional characters ever get to make that jump. Sherlock Holmes didn't, Magnum didn't, Indiana Jones didn't either. But a guy who once stopped a chemical leak with a chocolate bar, well, he did. And the dictionaries were honestly pretty late to the party. As early as 1989, Richard Dean Anderson was on the Arsenio Hall show laughing about the fact that people were already using MacGyver as slang for pulling off the impossible with nothing but junk and some confidence. By 1992, the verb was showing up in print, which meant that someone somewhere was casually writing, "Well, I MacGyvered it," in a sentence, and nobody questioned it.
Blockbuster died. VHS died too. But MacGyver survived as part of language. Quite possibly the most unbreakable legacy any TV character has ever managed to achieve.
Number 3. A $40,000 fake rhino fooled the entire country. MacGyver dealt with arms dealers and international criminals, but in 1989, the show almost got into serious trouble because of a rhinoceros. In the episode Black Rhino, MacGyver faced poaching directly. And because the production team had no interest in being subtle, they spent $40,000 building a very realistic animatronic rhinoceros. It looked shockingly real. So real that when the episode aired, ABC's phone lines lit up. Viewers were angry. Animal rights activists flooded the network with complaints, believing that the show had actually hurt a real rhinoceros on camera. The irony was harsh. The entire point of the episode was to be against poaching. They spent $40,000 trying to protect rhinos, and they ended up being accused of hurting one. So when ABC aired the episode again in 1990, they made sure to add a disclaimer, clearly stating that the animal and the injury were completely fake. And because this was late 80s network television, the episode also ended with a public service announcement from Richard Dean Anderson himself, warning that black rhinos could face extinction by the year 2000 if poaching continued.
Number 4. Dana Elcar was going blind and kept showing up anyway. Dana Elcar played Pete Thornton on MacGyver for the entire run of the series. Mac's boss, his trusted listener, and a steady voice in his ear when everything went wrong. Pete wasn't the guy defusing bombs, but he was the guy making sure that someone was there to defuse them. And during Season 6, something very real started happening behind the scenes. Elcar was developing glaucoma. Now at first, he tried to keep working quietly, but scripts became harder to read. Moving around the set became more difficult. He found himself depending on others for things he had always handled on his own. Eventually, he told the production the truth. He was losing his vision. Now, here's where most shows would have made a quiet, creative decision. You can write the character out, you can bring in a replacement, or let him slowly fade into the background and just hope that nobody notices. But instead, the producers and Richard Dean Anderson did something that nobody expected. They wrote it into the show.
What's going on with your eyes? It's my peripheral vision.
In the 1991 episode Blind Faith, Pete Thornton is diagnosed with vision loss, directly matching Elcar's real condition. Now, the show never turned him into someone to feel sorry for. He was still Pete, he just couldn't see. By the time the series ended in 1992, Elcar was legally blind. He performed by having scripts read out loud to him and then memorized everything. He used physical guide marks on the set to help him move through scenes. The cast adjusted around him, the crew adjusted around him. And when there was talk of quietly removing Pete from the show, Anderson reportedly pushed back. He wanted Elcar's real struggle to be shown on screen, not simply hidden away.
Number 5. The pilot was so bad, 2 people used fake names. Now, before MacGyver became a household name, the first episode almost ruined everything. The original 1985 pilot was filmed as a full 90-minute TV movie. And according to executive producer John Rich, it was a disaster. It was slow, bloated, and just wandering. ABC reportedly watched the finished product and saw what Rich later called a dead duck. So over one Easter weekend, Rich cut 30 minutes out of it. The episode was reduced to a tight 60 minutes that actually moved. Problem solved. Well, not for everyone. The original director, Gerald Friedman, was so angry about the edits that he asked the Directors Guild to have his name removed entirely. So the directing credit reads Alan Smithy, the industry's official fake name used from 1968 to 2000 for directors who felt their vision had been destroyed. And it didn't stop there. The writing credit was changed too, credited to Thackeray Paller, a fake name for series creator Lee Davids-Lotoff. 2 fake names on one pilot. That's not a production credit, that's a witness protection program.
Number 6. Richard Dean Anderson was already MacGyver before the audition. Some actors spend months getting ready for a role, but Richard Dean Anderson just showed up with a resume that already looked like a MacGyver episode. At 17, he and a couple of friends biked from Minnesota to Alaska, about 5,600 miles, with no sponsorship and a completely reckless amount of teenage confidence. Before acting became his career, he worked at Marine Land of the Pacific as a stunt diver and whale handler. He performed alongside orcas and pilot whales. Later, during his self-called hippie years, he worked as a mime, a juggler, and even performed as a jester in a Renaissance-style cabaret. Acting wasn't even his first plan. Anderson wanted to play professional hockey.
Show him how to skate now. Go on, Mac. Do it!
That dream ended when he broke both his arms in separate high school games, which might be the most hockey way possible to accidentally end up in Hollywood. The love for nature, the river rafting, the wandering spirit, none of that needed acting. The writers even added some of Anderson's real-life interests into the character, blurring the line between Richard and Angus until it almost disappeared. So when MacGyver seemed like a guy who'd rather sleep under the stars than check into a hotel, well, that wasn't acting. That was just perfect casting.
Number 7. A ditch broke MacGyver's back. MacGyver could stop a nuclear meltdown with a paperclip, But Richard Dean Anderson couldn't fix his own spine.
Now what?
Anderson did a lot of his own stunts, and his body kept track of the damage. One of his worst injuries had nothing to do with an explosion or a falling set. During season 1, Anderson ran into a hidden ditch while filming a running scene. The impact caused serious spinal compression that eventually needed back surgery and left him with pain for decades. He also tore ligaments in his knees more than once. At one point, it was so bad that the writers had to write a leg injury into an episode to explain why MacGyver was suddenly limping instead of running. When the series ended in 1992, Anderson was physically exhausted. He later said he left the show because his body couldn't take the punishment anymore. The production later relied more on his longtime stunt double, Steve Blaylock, but by then, most of the damage had already been done.
Number 8. Fans mailed in MacGyver's best hacks. The producers of MacGyver didn't come up with every escape trick in the writer's room. They let the audience help, and they even paid them for it. The show invited fans to mail in ideas for MacGyverisms, clever, scientifically realistic hacks that Mac could use to get out of trouble. If a submission passed the show's internal review, the fan reportedly got between $100 and $200, which in the 80s was enough to buy a VCR, or at least a very questionable amount of hair product. Thousands of letters poured in. Most weren't usable, some were probably kind of scary, but a few were genuinely brilliant. One of the most famous examples is the radiator egg. In the season 2 episode, Bushmaster, MacGyver stops a leaking radiator by cracking a raw egg into it.
Egg whites are good for a lot of things. Lemon meringue pie, angel food cake, and plugging up radiators.
As the engine heats up, the egg whites cook and harden under pressure, temporarily plugging the leak. It sounds completely made up, but years later, Mythbusters tested the trick during their MacGyver special and confirmed that it really works. The show wasn't just one man. It was like a nationwide think tank with a mailbox. Hey, quick pause. If you're enjoying this countdown, be sure to hit that like button. It tells YouTube that you want more deep dives into the shows that shaped your childhood. And drop a comment with your favorite MacGyver hack. Was it the chocolate bar, the radiator egg, or just something you tried at home and never told anyone about?
All right, let's get back to the countdown. Number 9. They hired real scientists to check the homework. While other action heroes survived impossible situations through sheer strength and questionable physics, MacGyver had actual scientists on the payroll making sure the hacks made sense. The show brought in John Koivula, a world-renowned gemologist and chemist connected with the Geological Institute of America. Not exactly the kind of resume you'd expect for a guy escaping a locked warehouse with a stick of gum and a battery, but that was the job. Now, Koivula, along with other technical advisors like Jim Green and John Potter, reviewed the MacGyverisms to make sure they were based on real physics and chemistry. According to Koivula, about 90% of the tricks on the show were based on feasible scientific ideas. And that's what set MacGyver apart from everything else on television. The escapes felt real because somewhere under the TV magic, the science was actually holding it together.
Number 10. They hid the dangerous steps so kids wouldn't blow themselves up in the garage. The science was real, but the producers made sure it was never complete. Any hack that involved explosives, volatile reactions, or anything that could reasonably end with a fire truck in someone's driveway had something missing on purpose. The writers and technical consultants built in what they called a safety gap. They would deliberately leave out at least one critical ingredient or key step from the most dangerous builds. On screen, the hack looked complete. In real life, if a kid tried to follow along at home, it would fail. The production team treated it like a strict rule. Show enough to make the scene work, but leave out enough to keep it safe. Because the last thing ABC needed was a press conference that started with the words, "inspired by last night's episode." Yeah, exactly. And those precautions weren't just ideas. In 1991, the LA Times reported incidents of kids trying to build homemade devices using household cleaners after watching the show, which is exactly why the production team became even more careful about what made it to air and how much detail they included.
You always got an answer.
Doesn't always work.
Your batting average is pretty good. Just get us back.
Why? Thought you were having fun.
That was the magic. but it also meant that there was always a kid somewhere watching a little too closely and taking notes.
Number 11, fans banned MacGyver from having a girlfriend. MacGyver could defuse a bomb, escape a locked building, and outsmart an arms dealer before lunch, but apparently one thing he couldn't handle was a steady girlfriend. In Season 6, the writers tried something new. They introduced a recurring love interest named Maria Romberg, played by Brigitte Stenberg.
Years all the hate. I never would have known how wonderful he is.
The idea was to give Mac a little stability, a little romance, maybe even a hint of a normal personal life. But the fans were not interested. The backlash went deeper than just screen time. Fans saw Mac as a nomadic, unattached, solve it all and move on kind of hero. Giving him a permanent girlfriend made the character feel smaller. And if we're being honest, a good part of the audience probably liked that Mac was technically still available, if you know what I mean. The protests worked. Maria disappeared after just a couple of episodes. Romance got dialed way back. Yeah, Mac still had the occasional fling, and an old flame showed up from time to time, but the show never tried a long-term love story again. The only woman who stuck around was Penny Parker, played by Terry Hatcher, and that relationship was strictly platonic. Instead, the emotional focus of the show became Mac's friendship with Pete Thornton. Loyalty, trust, mutual respect. That was the kind of relationship the audience really cared about protecting.
Number 12. Nobody knew his first name for 6 years, not even the crew. For 6 full seasons, nobody knew MacGyver's first name. Not the villains, not the audience, and reportedly, not even most of the crew. Anytime someone got close to asking, Mac dodged it like a man guarding classified information. Early production drafts listed his first name as Stacy, but Richard Dean Anderson and executive producer Henry Winkler looked at that and decided together that it wasn't going to happen. Instead of picking a new name, they just erased it completely. The mystery lasted until Season 7 in the 1991 episode Goodnight MacGyver Part 2. Mac hallucinates that he's in medieval Scotland, meets an ancestor, and casually reveals that they share the same first name, Angus. The name was so closely guarded that it wasn't even written in the final script. Cast and crew reportedly didn't find out until the scene was filmed. Anderson had spotted the name on a Vancouver billboard for pollster Angus Reid and thought it sounded perfectly Scottish and grounded. It fit, even if Mac clearly hated it. Throughout the series, he visibly winced at his own first name and insisted on being called just Mac or MacGyver.
Name's MacGyver.
Name's MacGyver.
Name's MacGyver. Name's MacGyver.
Which made sense. When your last name becomes an actual word in the dictionary, the first name is just decorative.
Number 13. Cartoon MacGyver almost happened, more than once. Back in the day, any show that became popular enough eventually got pitched as a cartoon. So at some point, someone inevitably asked, what if we animated MacGyver? It got further than you'd think. In the early 2000s, there was a real attempt to launch a spin-off called Young MacGyver, following Mac's nephew, Clay. A live-action pilot was actually filmed.
They retail for up to $1 million a carat, and judging from the sample, it was a sizable supply.
Starring Jared Padalecki years before Supernatural, but it didn't get picked up, and part of the reason goes back to Richard Dean Anderson himself. He was fiercely protective of the character, turning down merchandising deals and refusing to let Mac be reduced to slapstick gimmicks made to sell toys. But even without an official cartoon, MacGyver's influence ended up all over animation anyway. And then there was MacGruber, the SNL parody that took the improvise under pressure idea to full absurdity.
Making life-saving inventions out of household materials.
Eventually becoming a movie and a TV series. The slapstick version that Anderson specifically wanted to avoid, well, it kind of happened anyway, just with someone else's name on it. But the original Mac stayed untouched. No toy empire and no watered-down cartoon clone.
Number 14. The CIA was apparently taking notes. Yeah, the show had millions of fans, and some of them apparently had security clearances. During the Cold War, American intelligence reportedly watched MacGyver, not just for fun, but for ideas. Jonna Mendez, former chief of disguise at the CIA, has said that the show's "use what's around you" philosophy actually resonated inside the agency's Office of Technical Service. That's the real-world department responsible for field gadgets, concealment devices, and creative problem-solving when operations go wrong. And when the show was rigging door alarms out of fishing line and chewing gum, real operatives were doing their own version of it. The CIA has shared stories about using dead rats as hiding spots for secret drops.
The agency has even hosted events comparing shows like MacGyver to real-world field operations. And while they point out where TV exaggerates, they've also admitted one thing. The core idea of creative problem-solving under pressure isn't fiction. That part is real, which meant that somewhere in some windowless government building, an intelligence officer has almost certainly looked at broken equipment and thought about what a fictional guy with a mullet would do.
Number 15. MacGyver made the NRA's hit list. In the middle of the 1980s, when every other action hero on screen was basically a walking weapons catalog, MacGyver showed up with a Swiss Army knife and zero interest in ammunition.
Looks like they're spring-loaded. Hang on a second.
And not everyone liked that. The show had a strong anti-gun message built into it. In the middle of 80s action culture, where every other hero solved problems by shooting, that made MacGyver different. According to executive producer Stephen Downing, the show got on the NRA's radar, and the group reportedly told members to boycott the series and pressure sponsors to pull their ads. In the decade of Rambo, Commando, and every VHS cover showing a guy holding something that explodes, MacGyver got the heat, not for firing too many bullets, but for refusing to fire them at all. Richard Dean Anderson didn't back down. Years later, he said he was proud of the reaction. To him, if the show caused that much noise, it meant people were really paying attention. The writers took it as proof they were doing something right, and they kept going. And there you have it. 15 weird and wild facts about MacGyver, a show so good it literally became part of the English language. And honestly, if you've ever fixed something with duct tape and a prayer, you owe this man some royalties. Which fact surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments. And hey, share this with a friend who still thinks they can fix a leaky faucet with a paper towel and sheer willpower. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and ring that bell.